Welcome to the Holding Time podcast. Here we discuss breastfeeding in all its complexity, the ups and downs, the challenges, the triumphs. Whether you're expectant, a new mother, or simply interested, I hope you'll appreciate the incredible warrior women who are featured in this series.
Hi, my name's Natalie. I have a 3-year-old daughter and I'm currently 37 weeks pregnant to have a second daughter. Wasn't the best journey in the beginning. My daughter has a cow's milk protein allergy. So we identified that when she was about 6 weeks old, and hence that meant that I needed to eliminate dairy and soya and sort of lots of other things from my diet while I was breastfeeding her. So that sort of had its added complications in terms of breastfeeding.
Where did you give birth?
Delivered at the Liverpool Women's Hospital. It was a planned induction, but I was really lucky that I had a really quick induction. Got induced at 9 o'clock in the morning and had it by 8 p.m. in the evening. So yeah, I was really lucky.
So did you always plan to breastfeed, or is it something that just came about, immediately after birth with the suggestion of the midwives, or what was your preparation for breastfeeding?
So my background is I'm a health professional, so I was a psychiatric nurse and then went to work as a health visitor. So worked as a health visitor for 4 years, so I always knew the benefits of breastfeeding just due to my job. However, obviously the reality of breastfeeding and the theoretical concepts of breastfeeding are very different. But yeah, I knew I wanted to try, I knew I wanted to feed her. I knew the benefits for me, I knew the benefits for her, but sort of with a little 37-week plus 1 day-year-old baby who is a little bit too jaundiced to wake up and feed, the reality of trying to get her to latch on and feed was quite difficult in the early days. Luckily, I'd expressed colostrum that time, so I was able to sort of give her the colostrum enough to be able to wake her up, to be able to then eventually be able to get her to latch. It definitely had its challenges, along with a tongue tie, along with sort of all those other things in the early days, which obviously you understand theoretically, but living it and actually in real life is quite different.
So how would you compare it? Because obviously you've visited loads of mothers who've given birth and you've been on that side of it. So how does it compare? Like, what did you think about that?
I think as a practitioner, I always knew it was hard. And I always remember the biggest tip I always gave to mums was never to give up on a bad day. So I always used to say to them, the journey of breastfeeding isn't easy, but promise yourself one thing, that you never sort of give up and stop feeding on a bad day. Always make sure you're making sort of an informed choice. And I feel as a practitioner, I always had the time for breastfeeding mums, and I'd always make sure that they were supported to be able to make informed choices, because breastfeeding isn't for everybody. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of commitment, and it's really hard work. I think some of the challenges that I faced was more about the professionals who were visiting me and feeling that the advice probably wasn't always the best advice that I was given based on sort of the knowledge that I already had.
So can you give us an example of advice that you received that you wouldn't, for example, use as a health visitor? What?
I remember being visited by somebody who was coming out to try and help support the baby with latching. The baby was only a week old, maybe. We'd spent 5 days in hospital, so we'd not been home very long. And she was really jaundiced and she was really tired, so it was really difficult to get her to latch. She'd often only take one side of the breast and then she'd fall asleep. This practitioner told me to strip the baby down, leave the baby to just cry for a couple of minutes and then pick her back up and then try and feed her again. But actually, her tummy was that small that actually she was quite content with one breast and quite happy. And yeah, that meant I needed to feed her more often because obviously she'd digest that quicker. But the distress of stripping your baby down and leaving them to cry wasn't sort of the best advice. And I think it was trying to understand that it's not a one size fits all. And obviously we needed to take into account the fact that my baby was 37 weeks, that she was only born at £5.10, that she was tiny, that she was tired, she was jaundiced, and actually she was gaining weight and she was doing really well. So it wasn't that she wasn't getting enough, it was just that she was just a bit lazy. She'd like to feed on the nipple and not on the actual breast, so she'd always sort of, you'd try and attach her to the breast and then she'd pull herself back and wiggle her head back onto the nipple, and you'd use your little finger to take her off, try and relatch her. She'd do that for like a second and then she'd pull herself back off onto the nipple again. And I remember asking a professional and saying, she shouldn't be nipple feeding, she should be breastfeeding. And they said, but she's trying to control the flow. She's trying to sort of slow down the flow. You've got such a good supply that she's trying to be in control of it better. And the only way that she can do that is to be more on the nipple as opposed to on the breast. And if that's not causing you any discomfort and that's not causing you any pain, then that's okay for her to do that. I think obviously we found out then that she had a tongue tie. So that obviously didn't help the fact that she sort of did feed like that.
Literally couldn't get her tongue around your nipple.
Unfortunately, we were in a position where she was born over the Christmas period. So obviously services are more restricted. And we also got hit by an unexpected curveball when we were looking for a private tongue tie consultant. There was a stop on all private tongue ties. There must have been an incident or something must have happened. And so all appointments were cancelled whilst this incident was investigated. So we weren't even able to go privately and had to wait sort of until after the New Year period. So just I was lucky because, again, I was able to find some good support in the community and was able to sort of learn how to use like a deeper latch and how to sort of latch her without it being too painful. And I was able to carry on feeding until I was able to get the tongue tie snipped.
I often find when I talk to women that those who are health professionals are better at navigating the system.
It's hard navigating the system. I think even as a health professional, you know what is available and what's there, but actually still sometimes get into it is really difficult. So for those people who don't know what's there, I can't imagine how even harder it is for them to get to what they need to get to. And some mums don't know what's normal and what's not normal. So I feel that that's where sort of antenatal contacts come in really well, because actually being able to explain to a mum in antenatally to say breastfeeding shouldn't be painful, shouldn't hurt you. You may sort of get that initial discomfort while the baby latches on, but while they're feeding, it shouldn't be painful. And if it is painful, it's probably a sign that the baby's not latched right. And I always used to say to mums sort of, you've just given birth, and that's probably been one of the most painful experiences of your life. And then when this baby's latching on and pinching and it hurts, you're probably a bit like, well, that's nothing compared to what I've just been through. So you just put up with it. But actually don't put up with it, because you're going to cause yourself a lot of damage. And as you go along, then you're going to cause more damage, and it gets unbearable then, and you can't carry on. So make sure you stop and relax the baby, because it shouldn't hurt, it shouldn't be painful.
I think that's where women are really confused, because they're told by so many people, well, it's going to hurt. And then they think, well, how much is normal? And pain is so subjective.
I do think having a child with a milk allergy and breastfeeding is really, really, really difficult. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life.
Why is it difficult? Because I never experienced this. I did have a friend whose baby had a milk allergy, and the baby had constant diarrhea. It was like really a worry. You
make a lot of sacrifices when you're a parent, but to also give up sort of like dairy milk and Yorkshire puddings and all those types of stuff as well.
It's quite strict. It's not like just swapping over to oat milk and coffee. It's like,
and particularly because you've got a child who's got a cow's milk allergy who reacts through breast milk, shows how sensitive that they are, because the proteins are obviously quite broken down for breast milk as opposed to sort of formula milk. And I remember the paediatrician sort of giving me a tin of formula and saying, I need you to take this home. And I was saying, but I don't want to give a formula. And she said, I need you to have a backup there. If something happens to you, you can't go to a shop and just buy it in a formula. Your baby needs to have amino acid milk, which has no cow's milk proteins within it. But I suppose for me, it's checking every label. It's being aware when you go to a restaurant, you can't just order sort of food. It's being aware of sort of cross-contamination and also feeling responsible. So I remember sort of times where when she was quite little and you'd go to a restaurant and you'd felt that you'd ordered everything that was dairy free, and at that point it was dairy free, soya free, oat free, nut free, beef free, and you'd ordered something that was free of all those ingredients, and then I'd have a tummy ache when I come home from the restaurant, and I'd be a bit like that food was some level of cross-contamination, because obviously my body didn't make the proteins anymore to break down cow's milk. So I'd sort of feel the effects of that as well. And then I'd feed the baby and she'd scream and she'd scream and she'd scream, and you'd feel like you were making the baby sick. And at those points we'd have to use frozen breast milk from the freezer that may have been sort of like a week or two old, and you knew sort of had no level of cross-contamination in, and that would settle her. But feeling that you were making your baby sick, I do understand why lots of mums who have a child with a milk allergy would stop, because there's a lot of responsibility and it's really hard.
That's really interesting. I've never heard that explained in that way, and you did so well to keep going. I mean, it's a lot of sacrifice, isn't it, as you say?
2 years later, the world of vegan is much bigger now than what it ever used to be. So trying to find alternative food 2 years ago. Luckily, quite a lot of the sort of big supermarkets use online shopping and allow you to use filters. So you might be able to type in fish fingers, but actually filter it so that you can find fish fingers that are milk free. And lots of the brands, some brands might add milk and some brands don't add milk. So actually you can eat sort of a normal diet. It's just being aware of those little sort of tips that you can find those alternatives. And 2 years in, my little girl's still got an allergy now, so she's nearly 3. But the food market is very different now to what it was 3 years ago. And vegan is much more of a bigger thing. So we can sort of eat a much more of a normal diet.
So what advice would you give then to new mothers, like facing into this unknown world of potential hazards that, you know, you've encountered?
I suppose the only advice is that it has to be right for that mum, because it's a lot of sacrifices and it's a lot of hard work, and mentally you've got to be in the right place to be able to make those sacrifices, because you already make enough sacrifices being a parent, but effectively it changes the way that you are. So obviously the way that you can eat and the choices that you can make, that's a lot of sacrifice. And as much as we love our children, and I love my little girl to bits, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done for her. I hope that it made a difference to her, but obviously you never know. You don't know, sort of, you can't measure that difference.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone involved, our funders, Cheshire and Merseyside Women's Health and Maternity Programme, Arts Council England Lottery Awards for their support, along with all the amazing mothers and partners who have helped to make this project happen. You can find out more about the project by visiting holdingtime.org.